Hello, I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Welcome to Bubble Pop. This is the live weekly show where we talk about some of the biggest headlines and juiciest news tidbits so you can take a little step back from all that doom scrolling. Although I guess we kind of talk about the doom, so maybe this is just an offshoot of doom scrolling. Just a reminder that if you want to support the show, you can do that on Patreon, Substack, and YouTube, as well as anywhere that you like to listen. And while we're live, we like to leave about 10 minutes at the end of the show to take audience questions. You can ask those using the super chat function. I tend to prioritize those, but we usually have time for regular ones too. So don't be shy if you got something you want to ask. All right, let's get into it. A lot has happened in Canadian politics in the last little while, so I figure we are overdue for a little check-in. Canada made a mark, you got it, Mark Carney, on the world stage when Carney gave a big old speech at Davos, which came after Carney made some moves to diversify Canada's trade, including the Chinese electric vehicles coming to Canada. The Conservatives had their convention and locked down their love affair with Pierre Poilievre. He's here to stay, at least for now, as are their lies in fundraising emails, which we got this week, like how they claimed they got confirmation that the mainstream media all has Mark Carney's back, which was actually the result of a guy who represents the scripted TV and movie industry speaking at a convention. So, not a journalist. But hey, at least that weekend also gave us that beautiful moment of Carney in Hollander's Team Canada fleece, where he looks like the girl that really is going to be okay. He looks happier there than he does when he steals another conservative policy. But hey, at least that weekend, or on top of all of that stuff, Conservative MP Jamil Jivani is cosplaying as someone who has any role in trade negotiations in a recent seemingly rogue trip to the United States. And the polls are looking very bleak for the NDP as their leadership race enters its home stretch. There is a lot to talk about. If you couldn't tell, by the way, I kind of struggled through all that. It's a hefty lift. So I need some help, which is why I'm bringing up some old friends. We got Paris Marx on the show today, the host of the podcast Tech Won't Save Us. He's a tech critic, an author, a podcaster, and a fan favorite of you guys. Supriya Dwivedi is a former senior advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. She's a regular talking head on some very popular shows, but today I am stealing her for my very own. Supriya, Paris, welcome to Bubble Pop.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to have you guys here, and I feel like you're a pretty iconic duo because you both can get a little spicy with the things that you say. So I'm a little scared of how this is going to go, but like in a good way,
I'll need to watch what I say about the provinces this time.
I know you had a big rant about that last time. That was like very thrilling. I'm like, Paris is not running for prime minister ever. Each province can just slice and dice that and put it up on stage, All right. Let's start, though, with Carney's current standing on the world stage. Obviously, that Davos speech left a mark. I'm sorry, I'll stop making that like dumb pun at some point. And we've also been pursuing some very interesting trade diversification, including with at least one country known for slavery. Whee! Though they have been implementing some reforms in recent years, but what do you guys think of these moves? Necessary pragmatism or unnecessary unfettered capitalism? Paris, I feel like you started to make some noises towards the end there, so you want to take first crack at this?
Sure. Like, listen, I obviously think it's necessary. Our biggest trading partner and previous closest ally, I don't know what we consider it now, has talked about literally annexing our country, and is quite clear that it wants to take away a ton of our industries, including the automotive industry. So it's quite important that we do diversify in this moment. The question is how to do it. What is the right way to do it? And I think what we kind of saw from Mark Carney's speech at Davos that, received so much praise was, on the one hand, he was, kind of identifying something that I think a lot of people see, which is this real kind of break within, the Western liberal order, or whatever you want to call it, where you have all these countries who, previously depended on the United States now cannot feel so, feel that they can do that again and are trying to figure out what the path forward is. But then, if you kind of listen to the latter half of the speech, the solution was kind of like more neoliberal capitalism, more of the things that have kind of gotten us into this position in the first place. And, while I think trade diversification is absolutely essential, the question is, are we really going to go about it the right way? And is this, the right path to be taking in this moment? And I think that there's debate about the path that we should be pursuing.
What do you think, Supriya? Is this the right path?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd agree with a lot of what Paris had to say there. I think I would just say, and speaking about the speech itself at Davos, I think the vast majority of folks actually missed the overall gist of Carney's point in the speech, which is, I get that everybody was doing this breathless coverage over what a rebuke of Trump and America it was. But to me, that's a bit of a selective reading, because his actual message is kind of what progressives and much of the global South has been saying for the last little bit, which is the rules-based international order doesn't actually exist and has long been a fraud. And countries like Canada have been upholding the myth of the rules-based international order simply because it benefited us, and now it no longer benefits us. So, that message to me is actually much more astonishing, given how much of a centrist, the prime minister is. And, basically his entire life has been upholding the very system that he now admits it was a fraud and has been a fraud for some time. And, I don't discount any of the criticism that's levied at Trump's way. But Trump didn't really kill it, right? He didn't kill the rules-based international order. It has been dead for some time. And we've been doing this like weird, long, prolonged weekend at Bernie's thing, pretending that the corpse is somehow still alive. So yeah, look, I think Trump is making things much worse. He defies all basic political and democratic norms. But, up until this point, all we've seen from other world leaders, and even from the prime minister and his front bench for the most part, has been appeasement and ring kissing, right? So I'm glad the prime minister gave the speech that he did, I suppose. But to me, it's probably a little bit more pertinent if we actually act now and he kind of walks his talk, because he sort of said this, like glimmers of this speech before in the past, and we haven't really seen a market change. So now I'm doing that market that you were doing. I don't know. Like, I thought I'd get on you too, but whatever,
Yeah. No, I totally hear you. And it's interesting that sort of one of the first big tests, right, he got lucky with, where Trump kicked us off of revoked our invite onto the Board of Peace, which I think that if he had accepted that after giving that speech, it would have been an immediate like, oh, okay, so that was just talk. So it's going to be interesting to see how he navigates a lot of this going forward, but and whether it represents a real shift from what some folks, international press was kind of saying, that Carney overly flattered Trump off the bat. So that was at least some people's read. I'm sure that I'll get some very angry folks with Canadian flags in their bios disagreeing with me on that. But
they're your favorite people.
Yeah. But, Paris, I know one thing that I think has you feeling maybe a little bit of Carney fever is the Chinese EVs. I know you wanted to talk about that. So what do you think about the fact that we're getting some of those? What's your read on that?
I think it's really interesting, right? Like, I think it's clear that Chinese EVs are coming. The question is like when, not if, right? And how that ultimately happens. And so I think it made sense for Carney to go over and try to like mend this relationship with China. I've been saying for a long time that I think we should be looking a lot more at how the Australians approach China and the kind of relationship that they have with China, rather than the one that we have often had, which has felt kind of like, echoing a lot of what the United States has wanted us to do, right, in relation to their kind of foreign policy toward China. But, with these Chinese EVs, okay, so there's 49,000 coming initially. We'll see what that's going to look like. But initially, that's going to be like Teslas that are made in China, Volvos that are made in China, not so much, Chinese brands and marks, which I have driven in other countries, and they drive quite well. There's no reason why Canadians shouldn't be able to drive them as well. But I think the bigger question is like, which was really interesting yesterday when the prime minister kind of like announced this new auto strategy, was kind of like, what is the future of, auto manufacturing going to look like in Canada? Because we very clearly see that, the companies that we have traditionally considered to be like the core of Canadian auto manufacturing, the big three American companies, are increasingly pulling back. There was a report out, I believe, this week that Japanese manufacturers are actually responsible for a lot of the jobs in auto manufacturing in Canada now. And so what is the future of that going to look like? So, the Prime Minister rolled out this auto strategy that really seems oriented toward trying to get more companies to manufacture in Canada. And that was part of what this deal with China is about. I think the big question is whether that is going to work. But I think it's something that, we do need to try. But I think, the other piece of that is that, okay, we're getting more EVs into Canada. But in the process of doing that, the Prime Minister is continuing to water down environmental rules that were put in during the Trudeau era, right? And, even I was listening to CBC yesterday, and they were saying that the modeling on these new kind of like approaches to automobiles, the environmental modeling, has not even been done. So they don't know really what the impact is. And again, it's like a further watering down through some kind of like new convoluted scheme that Carney has come up with to try to pretend that the environmental bona fides of Canada are not being like left behind, but they very clearly are in his pursuit of like economic growth and diversification and things like that.
No, Paris, the carbon capture is going to save us. Didn't you hear?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
We're going to find.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, right? Supriya, are you on board with that take? Like, what do you think? Do you think that we are pursuing this diversification and profit at the expense of the environment with this auto rules and stuff?
I mean, maybe. Look, I think we have to diversify our trading partners. I think that's clear. I think a lot of what Paris said is absolutely right. I mean, my whole thing is that if we are moving this way and we're going to start doing more and more trade with countries that we wouldn't have traditionally necessarily have embarked on trade agreements with, be honest with us. And I look at this in the context of like, the entire relationship, the 180 pivot that this government has taken with respect to the Modi government in India. Mm-hmm. And so, if you're saying that we need to ignore some of the allegations that have been made, or that the political level isn't going to deal with these allegations anymore, it's now completely into the levels of like national security advisors and intel and law enforcement, then like just be straight with us. Tell us that it doesn't really matter to you right now, the allegations of an extraterritorial murder of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil, and that it doesn't matter to you that Jagmeet Singh and it was had to get an RCMP detail because the RCMP gave him a duty to warn that he had allegedly agents of the government of India that were tailing him to the point where his wife had to give birth with armed guards present. And like, to me, it's still wild that this isn't a bigger story, because I think that if Jagmeet Singh was named John Smith and his wife had to give birth under the presence of armed guards because of, a credible threat to their life from a foreign government, to me, that would be a little bigger deal within the press gallery and within like the political chattering classes than it is right now. We've all just seemed to have forgotten it. In the meantime, we have completely vindicated and validated the Indian disinformation campaign against the Canadian government and the Canadian RCMP and our intel services. And so here we are, hoping to ink a free trade deal eventually with them, which again, like, okay, sure, fine. We've got a lot of stuff that they want. Okay. But at what cost? And if you're going to do that, then just be straight.
Yeah. And, it makes me think about, Carney really seems to be like pragmatism over everything. But I think there's a degree to which, as much as it is a myth that we have this like rules-based order, some of that myth is necessary, I guess, for enforcing some norms, like,
Sure.
Having consequences, having at least acting as though there are these rules is somewhat important on an international stage. So even if it is incredibly flawed, incredibly unfair, and incredibly racist in many ways, the way that this is sort of adjudicated and laid out on the international stage, I do worry about how much we're leaving by the wayside in terms of trying to enforce values in this world at the expense of this pursuit of pragmatism. And I think that you laid that out really well, Supriya. I don't know if you guys
I think you see that in kind of like Carney's approach to foreign policy as well, right? Where, obviously he really wants to not anger Donald Trump too much. So anytime the United States breaches international law, you kind of see like these statements from Canada and from Mark Carney kind of like acting as though the country had it coming or something, right? They violate international law in Iran, and it's like, yeah, well, we don't like Iran, so it's okay. Or like they literally kidnap the president of Venezuela, and it's like, yeah, well, he was a bad guy, but we would like for people to respect international law or something. And it only really becomes a problem when they start to make those kind of threats against Greenland, right? Because it's European and whatnot.
Yeah, sorry, can I just jump in there? Because you're going on a list, and I think it's a good list. The one thing I would add to that is that Canadian ICC judge that's been sanctioned by the US, just as a Canadian who can't use their email, can't use their banking, can't travel, and we've been like pretty silent about it, which is, again, like, I get that there's a fine line, but does it mean you can never stick up for your values? Does it mean you can never stick up for a Canadian that's being bullied by the entire heft of the American government? Like, I don't know. I
was even shocked that the big story that really interviewed her and talked about what she's going through was published by Irish media and not Canadian media. Yep. It's like, what are you guys doing?
Embarrassing. Yeah. And these are all, it's been fascinating. Like I felt like I got a bit of I gleaned a bit of his mindset in the speech that he gave, where he talked about countries having to basically earn the right to stick up to Trump. And like, it basically, to me, that suggested that he felt we hadn't earned that ability yet before. And so I was like, okay, so is that your explanation for all of these kind of gutless moves? And for that to be true, again, like the after really matters. And I feel like we haven't seen super clearly what the after looks like yet, because there haven't been any big tests yet. So I'm very curious to see how that goes. Speaking of big tests, we've got some by-elections coming up. A lot of liberals have, moved on to greener or international pastures, and
more to come, it seems.
Yeah, and and now conservative Twitter's like, you see, all the liberals are leaving too. And I'm like, it's a little different than floor crafting, but we don't have to use our critical thinking skills all the time, I guess. And so they got physician Daniel Martin is running in Chrystia Freeland's old riding. And then there's also, and this one I think is more interesting, the Ontario NDP deputy leader, Dolly Bigham, and I'm sorry if I'm saying her name wrong. I hadn't heard of her, which is embarrassing because I don't cover provincial politics that closely. She is running in Bill Blair's riding. So I guess, like, what do you guys think? Like, she's running for the Liberals. What do you guys think of these announcements? Are these big gets for the government? My dog clearly thinks that they are a big deal. So I'll mute myself and let you guys sound off with your thoughts on them.
Yeah, I mean, Paris, what do you think? Because I think I probably agree with Rachel that the Dolly switcheroo to the federal level liberally is probably a little bit more interesting, just because, and that's not a knock on Dr. Martin at all. Like, I think that's also she's a good name. Folks would probably know her best from like a 2014 Senate testimony that she would have given to the US about the benefits of public health care. So look, I think the thing that I find interesting is that now this has created this whole ripple of drama in Ontario politics, because now that Nathaniel Erskine Smith, he represents Beaches East York federally. It's the neighboring riding of Scarborough Southwest. He's now saying, now that Dolly's going to move federally, he's going to do the switcheroo to go back to provincial politics and, run in that riding. And now there's some suggestion on corners of the internet that the Ontario Liberal Party is going to swoop in just to say, or make rules, like make a made up rule to suggest that if you're running in that by-election, then you can't then also run for leader, which seems like a rule that's only meant to cockblock Nate out of running for leader. And it seems like a really dumb idea to me, but let's see what they end up doing.
Do they just hate him? Like, what's the
I think they hate themselves. They hate winning. Okay. They hate everything. They hate joy, added to the list.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Paris, what are
It's
your
wild.
thoughts
I had
on
not
it?
heard that, actually. I knew that Nate was planning to run in that riding, but I hadn't heard the additional part of that story. Not surprised with the Ontario Liberals, though.
No.
Yeah, I think I would say in general, like I agree, right? I would say the one I was more interested in was Danielle Martin moving into that seat, just simply because, again, I had a better idea of who she was. I feel like the past few years, she's been kind of like off the radar, but it was a name I remembered as someone who was a real defender of public health care, which is, obviously something that's very important to me, especially at a time where we see Alberta, challenging the public healthcare system, once again, right? And I think that we need more defenders of the public healthcare system. Maybe we don't see defense of the Canada Health Act enough from the federal government. But I think so. I think what I would say is maybe I find these a little bit surprising because on the one hand, you have someone from the NDP, the Ontario NDP, moving into a Liberal seat, and you have someone like Danielle Martin, who at least I consider to be more of like a progressive voice, moving into these seats at a time where the Liberal Party seems to have taken a significant shift toward the right. You hear these jokes that the Mark Carney government is effectively a progressive conservative government, kind of wrapped in a liberal kind of cloak, right? And so I guess that was the only piece of it that kind of surprised me. We have seen these like conservative floor crossers and talks of potentially more of them, but to see the Liberal Party kind of attracting these more, at least the voices that you assume to be more progressive. I don't know the Ontario NDP deputy leader's politics very well, but I would assume it's a pretty progressive politics if that was the position that she held. Then yeah, that was kind of like the more surprising piece for me, which again, I think brings up not just questions about the Liberals and where they're going, but questions about the NDP as well and what's happening, on that side of things. But yeah, I would like to see Danielle Martin in Parliament. I don't know what role she'll have under a Liberal government and how much power she'll have to kind of, defend public health care. But yeah, I guess we'll see.
But like, if her thing was public health care, shouldn't she be running at the provincial level?
Yeah, totally.
Like, to me, it's also just like a bit of a mismatch. Oh, that dog has opinions, man. Rachel.
unless it's like, defending the Canada Health Act and making sure that provinces actually hold to their responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
But again, that requires more than one single MP to do that, unless they're moving her right into the health portfolio and telling her to go after it.
Okay, I think my dog is. Oh no, she's still busy. But the thing, her food just arrived, her food delivery, so she's very excited right now. It's like doggy Uber Eats, but anyway, not really. It's just dry food and
bougie ass dog.
Yeah, no, not at all. But no, basically, like I totally agree with you guys on several fronts, especially like. The thing that really struck me about Dolly specifically is you got to worry and wonder about. I think it definitely either says something about the Ontario NDP's fortunes or about Dolly herself, because to me it's an expression of sort of I don't know, political cynicism or it's the kind of thing that at least makes the onlooking public feel more cynicism, because Mark Carney's Liberals have, and to date, been very much governing like a progressive conservative party. So it's one thing for conservative MPs who identify maybe as progressive conservatives, who maybe don't see themselves in the same to the same degree as conservatives under the Pierre Poilievre banner as they might identify with Mark Carney's Liberals. Like I can see how someone could cross the floor under those circumstances without betraying their personal politics. But it's harder for me to see that from someone with an NDP background jumping to this federal Liberal Party. And, it just makes me wonder about the impact that has on how Canadians feel about our politics. Like, are these people in it for actual desire for change based on firmly held principles, or is it power for power's sake? And I just think that in these moments, it can be really, disenfranchising in a way for people to witness. I don't know if you guys agree with that though, because I'm not as familiar with Dolly's politics.
So I would just say that, like, I don't know, like I agree with your assessment in terms of like it being perhaps a little bit easier on the ideological spectrum for progressive conservatives or those that would consider themselves progressive conservatives within the current Conservative caucus to floor cross over to the Carney Liberals. But the only thing I would say to that is that all of every single one of those caucus members decided to put their name on a ballot under Pierre Poilievre as conservative leader. None of them were there when he wasn't leader, right? Like they were all, so to me, it's like, what changed, right? What changed was he lost the election and they're not in government. So all of them would have been fine with the leadership style of Pierre Poilievre had they been on those government benches and not on the opposition benches. So I don't.
So more cynicism.
Well, yeah, like I don't like letting them go on that, because to me that's a real cowardly kind of thing to do. Like at least in the context of Dolly. I also don't disagree. Like I would have thought her to be a little bit more on the progressive side of the ledger. And so again, going to the Carney liberals is a somewhat head scratching, but then you're like, okay, but there are at least a lot of progressive liberal caucus members within that caucus still. Right. And so it's not like she wouldn't have a home within liberal caucus, I guess. I don't know, like it to me, and I also don't know how closely folks like regular normal normies, right, that aren't steeped in politics every day, even fully will recognize the cross. And I don't mean that from like, but like she has a lot of name recognition in Scarborough Southwest. She's been serving as the MPP there for quite some time. So I'd imagine as she's door knocking around as a liberal, I don't know if she would provoke cynicism, because most people would be like, oh, you used to be provincial. Oh, now you're federal. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. But I don't know. Maybe that's overly simplistic.
No, I hope you're right.
There's also like a lot of, I would say, at least from like personal experience, and I feel like what I've seen in the polls, there's a lot of, kind of like goodwill extended toward Mark Carney and his Liberal Party at the moment as well, especially given like the political dynamics with the United States. I know people who vote NDP regularly, but are not like, super like diehard political people, partisan people who are like, yeah, I like what Mark Carney's doing. I think he's doing a good, it's like they're not paying attention to every little detail, but they like the fact that they think that he's the guy to go against Trump, especially when Poilievre is the other option, right? Yeah. I think it's right to be concerned about the cynicism, but I feel like with where a lot of the public is at the moment, I don't know if they're paying too much attention to the floor crossing. And I don't know, if you come from my part of the country, the parties all seem very similar, and we're used to that kind of thing anyway. So
yeah, but I found it interesting what you said about the people feeling as though Carney is the guy for this moment, right? Like the NDP, is it dead? Is there a way for it to come back from the brink? I mean, recent polling, some of it has been really bad. Like depending on which pollster you look at, one of them even had, I think, the NDP with no seats if an election were held. I think it was like 2 days ago. It's the NDP. Can the NDP survive, first of all, under this electoral system? And can it come back from its current, political out to pastureness?
So I'm old enough to remember when everybody said the Liberal Party was dead, right?
I remember that. Yeah.
And there were all these articles and all, I think there was even a book written to suggest that from now on, the Conservatives were going to be unstoppable. And just now that Harper had his 2011 majority, here on out, it's blue sails all the way through. So I think, the party can come back. I think what they've sort of had difficulty with in light of, and the Conservatives had this difficulty as well, but like when everything is focused on Trump and the economy and trade, then the guy who has steered not a country not just through one crisis but through two separate crises, right? First the 2008 financial crisis, and then post Brexit in the UK, they're like, okay, yeah, he's the guy. I think what the NDP should be doing is raising issues where they are differentiating themselves from the Liberals and pointing out the mismatch between the rhetoric and action. But I mean, they need a leader first, and I don't think that's certainly helping them right now that they're, and that's not a knock on Don Davies. I think he's doing a great job as interim leader. But they need a permanent leader in place to sort of figure out what's going on, and to really get their vibe and their mojo back. But I think there's a lot of stuff that they could be hammering the government on from a progressive side, particularly on a lot of the tech stuff, right? Like think about the way that this government is just sort of going all in on AI, which is basically just to slash a bunch of public service jobs and rely on chatbots. Like, I don't know, like to me, that's worrying. It's worrying when you when you hear the minister of AI and digital innovation refer to needing regs around AI that are light, tight, and right because of what the US is doing. Right. Like, I don't know, like, there's a lot of material there for the NDP to go after. So I wait till they get a leader and I guess they'll start doing it. I don't know.
Chris, I know that must have been hard for you to listen to because you love AI and Evan Sullivan so much. So I don't know if you have a rebuttal.
Totally. Well, like, and when Evan Solomon like explicitly comes out in response to media reports suggesting that the UK, Canada, and I think it was Australia are talking about banning X to like very clearly say we're not banning X, and then you have Toby Lutke responding, basically like thanking him for what he's doing. Yeah, which is like terrible, right? But to your point, Supriya, around the role of the chatbots, I can't remember the exact stats, but there was, I believe it was an Auditor General report recently on the chatbot that Revenue Canada had rolled out about how inaccurate the information that it was providing to Canadians was, right? So it's like, you really can't depend on these things. But the government has fully bought into the notion that, one, they should be kind of like jumping on this AI bandwagon, but also it seems that they are very much desiring to keep the tech industry on side rather than, you know, kind of having them as opponents as they have become at the end of the Trudeau
I hadn't noticed. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yes, how do you feel about like this shift from, it's still under the Liberal banner because you did a lot of work to you know, address that sort of social media, you know, tech
and the AI stuff and privacy and data protection. I mean, look, I think it's an interesting shift. Again, like I get that you need to have stakeholders on side. I'm not discounting that. But I just like, and I'm not one of these people that's like AI is all bad. Like, I just don't think that LLM chatbots are like what's going to save us, right? Like, I don't. To me, that's not the promise of AI. Is like this, like trying to make a penguin surfing down a whatever, like a snowboarding hill, right? Like, to me, the advent in AI is going to be looking at a bunch of different scans of like radiological scans of different cancers and figuring out what some of the precursor markers are for that, not necessarily what we're using it for currently. So I don't know. Like, to me, I think we need proper guide rails. I think we need risk assessments on technologies. I think a broad duty to act responsibly makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. It worries me when regulations are described as needing to be light, tight, and right. And the reason given is that then we'd be offside from the US without acknowledging that the EU and, you know, much of the rest of the world is moving in a different direction. But again, like, it's the longer term stuff that kind of worries me, because what happens when we go all in on these chatbots, you know, not just for CRA, but for other, like, do you remember what a big deal it was when passports were slightly delayed and people were all up in arms? Like, what do you think's going to happen when people are trying to get benefits or they can't, you know, or the chatbots giving them wrong information for their stuff? Like, there are going to be repercussions to these things. And I don't know if we've thought them out properly.
Totally. And we've seen how that's played out in other parts of the world already, right? Where these technologies have been rolled out and people have been really negatively affected by it. And I think I would just add, like, on the technology point, like I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And it's like, on the one hand, if we're in this moment where we're questioning our relationship to the United States and, you know, what it means to have, for Canada to have sovereignty in this new era, being totally dependent on so many of these US technologies, you know, is, you know, obviously calling that into question, right? Especially when we see the way that they have been using it, for example, like you said, against the ICC judge, the Canadian one, but many others as well, and how quickly people can be cut off. But then the other piece of that as well is, you know, to think about the harms that actually come from a lot of these technologies, right? And of course, the reason why there was a discussion about banning X was because this platform and the Grok chatbot on it was being used to create non-consensual explicit images of like millions of people,
including children.
Children. Yeah. And the government and like Evan Solomon could simply say that, basically we think this is wrong, but was not really doing anything, tangible about it, right? And I think for a lot of Canadians, this slapped as like the completely wrong way to be approaching this, especially in this moment, right?
And to say that we're not banning X as a quote tweet of his condemnation of those deep fakes. I just found that like just such a own goal too.
Which,
like,
by the way,
Jesus Christ,
he didn't mention X in the original tweet about being a generator and disseminator of child sexual abuse material, but managed to mention the platform by name in a tweet posted slightly after midnight on a weekend to say that they weren't going to ban it.
That the tech bros immediately lauded, as Paris mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's shocking, right? It would be a good opportunity for the NDP to come in and really have something strong on tech policy to try to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And Paris, you mentioned New Brunswick as well, that they've made the move to get off of X. I mean, so clearly it can be done.
Totally. Like, I think good on Susan Holt for, making that move. And I would like to see every other Canadian province, not to mention the federal government, follow suit and do exactly the same thing. Like, why should you be posting on this platform that has this chatbot that's enabling these things, that is run by a man who, like, again, explicitly attacks Canada, has been associated with the Trump agenda, and has turned this platform into, something that is basically where the algorithm is designed to push out these right-wing and far-right messages and to try to radicalize people down this path, especially when you see that these government accounts are often not even getting very much traction. Like, not many people are looking at and even seeing these things. So, like, why are you posting there? Why are you legitimizing this platform when there are other ways that you can get this message out to Canadians? And I would say, I think it's a time, again, for the government to think about, they should be posting on social media platforms where people actually are. I have problems with Facebook, but there's a lot of Canadians who use Facebook a lot more than use Twitter X. So I think it's justified in still posting there. But, thinking about the ways to continue reaching Canadians that are not through these platforms that are owned by American companies in a way that, maybe has not been as much at the focus for a while.
Okay, I want to make sure that we have time to talk a little bit about the Conservatives, the Conservative Convention, the rogue US trip, all that stuff, because we're going to pivot to audience questions in about 10 minutes. So first off, let's talk about the fact that they opted to keep Poilievre. What do you guys think about that? Do you think, like, Supriya, I'll go to you first. Like, is this a good thing for the Conservatives? Is this a good thing for Mark Carney? What does this mean for the future of the party? Does it actually mean anything when he was widely expected to survive this? Like, does it mean he's going to survive to the next election? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the writing was kind of on the wall that he was going to survive the leadership review, right? He's very much beloved by the Conservative membership, by the Conservative base. So, I mean, I don't think anybody that has a knowledge of Canadian federal politics thought that this guy was not going to pass his leadership review with flying colors. I think the problem that the Conservatives are going to have, and this is going to be true whomever is leader, but it's particularly true of Poilievre because of his own, style that he's developed over the years, is that you need an answer to Donald Trump, and you don't need a good answer. You just need an answer. And they're not, then right now their move is to just pretend he doesn't exist. And you can't do that because there's one person that's responsible for, like, upending our relationship with the US, and it is Donald Trump right now. And then, by extension of that, his administration and the rest of the mega folks that are, pushing it. But we all know the reason why he's not doing that, right? And it's because a sizable chunk of the Conservative voters approve of Donald Trump in much higher numbers than the rest of the country. And if you look at it, it's like you look at NDP, Liberal, Bloc Québécois voters, there's less than 5% support for Trump, his policies, his agenda, et cetera. You look at Conservative voters, depending on the poll, it goes anywhere between 35% and 40-ish, 41, 42%. That's not an insignificant amount of people, right? So they are in a bit of a pickle. I think the thing where Poilievre does have a path to victory is if Donald Trump and the U.S. trade issue kind of recedes to the background somewhat, and he can make crime and affordability and some of these other more pocketbook issues into the foreground and make that like the main sort of driving question. But he's still going to need some sort of answer to Trump, and he doesn't have one. Even with Jamil, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more, but like he's kind of dancing around what the issue is, right? He's like, our relationship with the United States is very important, and it's like, I'm here to make sure it's repaired, and it's like, well, who broke it, fuckface? Like what? Like it
enjoy
wasn't
that
us.
impression.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah. You know who's got an answer, or at least is very much trying to present himself as having an answer, is Jason Kenney. He's like, I could, if I was Pierre Poilievre, I'd feel those knife points at my back. Like Jason Kenney is clearly angling to fill Poilievre's shoes.
He's clearly
so blatant. Even on CBC, he was like straight up right away being like talking about how, he really should have gone after Trump in his speech. And it just, anyway, yeah. But Paris, your thoughts on
I think it's completely unsurprising that he got a high amount of support. I do wonder if in response to now having survived the leadership race, and again, I know that there's like a constant discussion of, oh, is this the moment where he finally like pivots and presents a different face and blah blah blah. Like if there's ever a time for him to do it, now is the time to do it. But I don't actually expect him to do it, right? But if he was going to seize the opportunity, now that he doesn't need to get like the hardcore base to support him in a leadership vote, if he was going to present a different face, now would be the opportunity for him to try. Again, I think the nature of who he is makes that very difficult for him to do, and I don't expect him to do it. I think maybe the other piece I would add is, if we're thinking about like a Prime Minister Poilievre, I think the discussion that we had about the NDP is actually very important to that, right? Because on the one hand, you kind of need the NDP to start splitting that vote, to start pulling the vote away from the Liberals in the electoral system that we have for him to rise and to get there. But then the other piece of that is that I think while he is there, it also creates an incentive for the NDP to be lower, because you have a lot of people who, are more progressive leaning, who just really do not want to see him become prime minister because they associate him with Trump. And so they are willing to leave their vote with the Liberals in order to make sure that the Conservatives don't form government, right? So yeah, there's a tension there as well.
Yeah. Another person who I think wants Poilievre's job is Jamil Jivani. That's my theory about his whole gambit with, honestly, his gambits overall. Like he's been really trying to push brand Jamil Jivani. Like he posts all these videos to his social media with his Jamil Jivani background and no Conservative Party branding. He's like doing this.
Do we know who all the signatures are from on that sign?
I have no idea. I'm assuming maybe his like campaign team, but I'm not sure. But also like, I don't know, I got a very clear sense from the way that everyone reacted to this in the last week that this was a rogue trip to Washington. Like even Poilievre, when he was being asked about it by reporters, first of all, he like filibustered in French for like, he spoke for like 3 minutes to the media, just like going on and on his way into his meeting with Carney yesterday, I believe. And then he also, or 2 days ago, I think, anyway, and he, when he spoke about Jamil Jivani's trip, he's like, well, I tell all of my MPs to defend their ridings and their ridings interests. And I'm like, okay, so you at least, he's either intentionally distancing himself from this for some kind of strategic reason, if he was aware, or he didn't know. And Jamil Jivani said, I'm going and you can't stop me. And that's to me also why he ended up with the briefing from LeBlanc. He just said, okay, well, I'm going. So you either tell me something or you don't, but I'm going to go and have these conversations. I don't know what your read is on this, but it seems to me like he's just a rogue dude who wants attention and is going down to the States and like looking like the biggest ass kisser ever with the way that he's talking about his conversations and like the kind of messages he's bringing back, and ass kisser too, specifically the United States, not to Canada. But I'm very curious to see your reactions to this whole move and your thoughts on it. Supriya, you want to take first crack?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I agree with you about the branding thing, because that's the first thing that sort of jumped out at me, right? There's no Conservative branding anywhere. He's got that giant blue banner behind him. It says Jamil Jivani, right? There's presumably a CPC logo on there somewhere, but you don't see it. All you see is that blue banner and then that Restore the North cap, which again is his own personal brand associated with his Canadian Charlie Kirk university tour that he's doing. It has nothing to do with Pierre Poilievre or the general Conservative brand, writ large. But I think the tone on its face that Jamil is taking of like, I'm going there for Canada, this is not a partisan issue. I think that's largely what the vast majority of Canadians would want to hear and expect from our elected politicians. I think, again, it gets tricky because this is the problem he's going to run into, is that you have to call out the cause of the mess, and the mess once again is Donald Trump. And again, to your point of whether or not he had the blessing of his leader, I mean, I'd also ask if he had the blessings of his colleagues who are the actual trade critics, right? Like, he doesn't represent the government of Canada. He doesn't represent the official opposition. He doesn't have a critic role on the opposition benches. So it's like, dude, how are you going there? Under what capacity? You're going there because you're bros with the vice president? Okay, cool, but that doesn't give you legitimacy or the authority to negotiate a hugely complicated and multifaceted trade file. So good for him. He got like a week's worth of news cycle out of it, but like, I don't really expect this to be anywhere. And I'd imagine that if I was in the leader's office, like the leader of the official opposition, Pierre Poilievre's office, I would keep my eye on Jamil, and I probably would have brought him in for a little bit of wrist slapping, like what's like, who told you to go down there? Why didn't you tell me? And I think this likely caught the Conservatives off guard, which again, to me, doesn't say team player. It says I'm thinking about my own personal ambitions a few years from now.
Yeah, like you were on that panel, the Power and Politics panel, when David Cochrane, the CBC host, was speaking to Lisa Raitt, a former Conservative cabinet minister, who I assume is still fairly tapped in with the Conservatives. Oh, yeah. And you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but like, and she asked David, did he inform the opposition that he was going? And, yeah. and just like here, and then her going here after you said that he had no like reason to be there, no one told him to go there, makes me think that yes, this did catch them off guard. Was that your takeaway from her reaction too? And do you think that's fair to?
Yeah, I think that's fair to assume. And I'll be interested to see like what happens next. So, like he said he had the message from the president for Canadians, which is like, we love Canada, and it's like, okay, great, I guess. But then he goes on this pivot about how like Canadians shouldn't be, pursuing stuff with China, and it's like, well, have you looked at what the U.S. is doing? Like, again, it just seems very bizarre to me that the Conservatives refuse to call out the very obvious 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah. Paris, your thoughts on Jamil's little vacation?
Yeah, I don't have really a ton to add. I clearly do not like this man at all. He's obviously very much aligned with like the politics of a JD Vance and Donald Trump, and is not really a figure who I want to see getting more attention or more prominence in Canadian politics. I just think it was really a big joke, and if anything, I think that it probably got more attention than it deserved, which was exactly what he wanted, but maybe was not what he should have gotten.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I want to turn to audience questions. I know I tried to leave a little time for us to talk about Harper, but I got too into all the other stuff. So, his beautiful.
Harper's good now, apparently, is what I've learned.
And Carney had very nice things to say about him, which, isn't a huge surprise because he has very nice things to say about Carney. But, we'll see if there's maybe an audience question about that. But I want to give the audience a chance to ask you guys some stuff because Supriya, I know, has a hard out of noon. So she's going to have to jump off. But Paris, maybe Paris and I will linger a little bit longer. But while I give the audience a chance to put their questions in the chat, can you guys please tell them where they can keep up with you? Supriya, I'll let you go first.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm on Instagram at Sups Dwivedi. I'm on Blue Sky at Supriya. And I'm on Twitter at Supriya Dwivedi. I write for the Toronto Star and Canada's National Observer. So you can read me there. And then I'm on Power and Politics and Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson on Mondays.
Nice. And you, Paris, where can they find you?
I'm on Blue Sky. That's the main place that I post. I have a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. I write a newsletter called Disconnect. Those are the main things. I have a book coming out later this year, but you'll have to stay tuned for more information on that.
Nice. Okay. I'm actually not seeing any questions in the chat just yet. So do you guys want to take a crack on like, what was your thought? What are your thoughts on the presentation and the framing that Harper got in this last week? Do you feel as though it's been a fair reflection of his legacy? Is this just the polite thing to do? What are your thoughts on? It was obviously because his portrait was unveiled. So there it is. And for those of you who are watching on video, what were your thoughts on the treatment Harper got this week? Supriya, maybe I'll let you go first yet again, just because I know that you've got that heart out, and I want to make sure you get your licks in, or lack thereof.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think to Paris's remark about apparently Stephen Harper is good now, I think, it's likely in direct comparison to what the current iteration of the Conservative Party is, right? It's kind of like somewhat analogous to the way that in the States, people yearn for George W. Bush, right? Because now we're dealing with Trump, and I'm not comparing MAGA to the current Conservative Party, but I just think there's remember a time when the prime minister could speak in full sentences and didn't just speak in slogans. So I think there's a bit of that, right? But I don't know, from my perspective, again, anybody who is a liberal, an NDP or a Black Quebecois that's around my age, I mean, we have a lot to thank Prime Minister Harper for, because the reality is the Harper government is what radicalized a bunch of millennials to get into politics, right? I still remember writing a final paper for this environmental law class I took in my third year of law school, where we were looking at Canada's role in the asbestos industry, and how we were pushing it into the global south. And there was this Environment Canada report that I needed to cite that had been pulled down and be completely scrubbed off of government websites. So I put out a few emails trying to track down this report, and my law professor ends up getting a call from Environment Canada asking why I needed the report, what type of paper I was writing, what type of research she did, what qualified us to write about the industry. And it was just it was weird and chilling and dystopian. And I was like, I don't like it. And I was like, okay, this is silly. And that's was the beginning of my foray into becoming a capital L liberal.
So this is Supriya's backhanded compliment for Harper. Thank you for being such an asshole that a bunch of us got into politics. Paris, what about you? What are your thoughts on how Harper was represented in the last week or so?
It's wild, right? I feel like these are all people who didn't actually live during the Harper years or something like that, or have just decided to completely forget what the Harper government was and what it did and what it represented. And even to Supriya's point about it being something better than what we're seeing now with Poilievre, it's but at the same time, it very much set the stage for the Conservative Party that we had now. I would argue in the sense that,
Yep.
I don't think you'd have a Pierre Poilievre without a Stephen Harper and the government that he created, right? It was it felt like Harper was somewhat restrained from really going for it, because of the merger with the PCs, but also the nature of the moment that he was operating in, and the need to make sure that he kept enough Canadians on side to try to get his majority government. But I feel like you've seen a lot more of that kind of fall away. Under the Poilievre leadership. Of course, things have changed since then. But at the same time, it's you mentioned the positive words from Mark Carney. And as Supriya is talking about, the kind of repression and stuff that we saw under the Harper regime, it also brings to mind how Carney is gutting Statistics Canada and so many of these important agencies. And we don't seem to be talking nearly enough about what he's doing to the capacity of the public service, which was obviously something that Harper took kind of a bone saw to as well. I think it's absolutely shocking to see how he's treated, but I also think it's not surprising, because I think we tend to have this kind of history, especially when people die, but also when they're being honored these ways, of kind of forgetting the negative parts of what they've done and kind of trying to look at the positives. And I think that does us all kind of a disservice in actually understanding how we got to the point that we're at today. And speaking of representation of Harper, I would say, I think he looks a bit thinner than I remember him being at any time in his portrait. Then,
you think they yassified him a little bit?
I do, yeah, definitely.
Give him the Ozempic treatment. That's funny. Okay, I'm gonna let Supriya slip away. Paris, maybe if you've got just a couple more minutes, there's
Sure.
a couple of questions in the chat that we'll just
I'm just going to bounce. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank you
everything.
so much for coming on,
Bye.
Supriya. This was awesome. Okay, take care. All right. So Paris, I'm gonna pull up. It's people have honestly just been chatting in the chat, which is really nice to
Good.
see.
That's what you want in a chat, right?
Definitely. But it's a little hard. I'm having a hard time like finding the questions, so I apologize in advance. But there is one here from Kurlo Tech who says, I feel like there's a huge opportunity for the NDP to fill the ever widening gap on the left that the Liberals are leaving behind. What do you think it would take for them to regain their footing?
Oh, I definitely think so. Obviously, if you listen to like the party hacks, they will tell you the complete opposite. If you listen to the people who are, kind of often representing the NDP in media, they talk about it needing to be more electable and things like that, which means to have more of a centrist leader. Obviously, I think that's completely the opposite of what they need, especially at a moment where you have, a Mark Carney who's basically a progressive conservative leading the country. And so. I think that basically means the NDP does need to take that direction. What it actually looks like, how they do that effectively, I think is a bigger question, and whether, given the political moment, they can get enough Canadians on side with a message like that is also like, it's not a something against the message, but just a reflection of the moment that we're in, where I think Canadians are focused on pushing back against Trump and also making sure that Pierre Poilievre doesn't become the prime minister. At least, Canadians on that side of the spectrum, right? And which is why they've kind of parked themselves with the Liberals for the moment. What that means for the leadership race. I think our kind of co-leader chosen pair, Rachel, has kind of been eliminated at this point.
Our dynamic duo, TNT.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we'll have to see who comes out on top. I think that there's arguments to be made for each of them, and I think that each of the candidates are making those arguments. Obviously the person whose policies I'm more interested in are Avi Lewis, quite clearly, right? But yeah, again, like I think there's an open question about the NDP at the moment. Not that they're going away, but whether they can really gain traction in this moment, I think is still something that remains to be seen.
Yeah, definitely. It's because I agree. Like, I don't want to count any party out, like what Supriya was saying, because I also remember when the Liberals were like quashed down to almost nothing. And
the NDP has been here before as well, right?
Yeah, and the Bloc Québécois, like, I do think that there is definitely a path back, particularly to me. I think they just have to get people excited enough about their policies to overcome their fear of Poilievre. And I think that that's going to be the key path for them. What that looks like, I don't know, but there's certainly we'll just have to watch and see who generates the most excitement. I'm trying to be, I don't want to throw my weight behind any particular candidate.
Yeah, right. Because you're trying to appear nonpartisan or not nonpartisan.
I don't even know what you call it in the context of a leadership race.
I know,
but, but I think that they do all have, good ideas, and they all have their pluses and minuses. And it's just a question of, I guess, what tactic you think is best for the political climate. So
I think that you can see the argument that having a union leader would be a good idea, who is really going in and connecting with workers. I think you can see the argument.
Butt dial me.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if we were bringing that one up. But
sorry, folks. Rob Ashton has butt dialed me a couple times, which I think is very funny. But
again, I think you can also see the argument for someone like Heather McPherson, someone who has been in Parliament for a long time, who has kind of made a name for herself in that way. I think also the argument to have a woman leader of the NDP is not one that makes no sense, right? I think we haven't had enough women party leaders or women prime ministers. I think it's quite shameful that we've only had one, and for a very short period of time in Canada. And I think that there's also a strong argument to make for Avi Lewis, right? For bringing, a much more kind of left-wing perspective, a very kind of, forceful one, to the conversation, and having that represented if he can win a seat in Parliament. But yeah, I think that there's an argument to make for both. Obviously, Avi's kind of policy program is the one that I would be more behind than any of the rest. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm actually not seeing a ton more questions in the chat. I'm really sorry if I missed some, but I think that's basically it. We can probably wrap things up. So thank you so much. Oh, somebody asked if we expect Melanie Joly to run as prime minister. I could see that in the future one day, maybe.
Maybe. I don't think anytime soon.
Yeah, she's not definitely not like forecasting it right now, but I think she's definitely a name that comes up though when people talk about the future of the Liberal Party.
Totally. And, she explicitly asked to get brought back into more of a domestic portfolio so that she can build more of a name for herself and be associated with these kind of like, industrial decisions and things like that, rather than being the foreign affairs minister. So I think it's definitely something that's on her radar. I think then the question is kind of like, what is Mark Carney's intention? Is he intending to be here for a long time or a good time? Is he intending to like make a lot of change in 4 years or something like that and then kind of get on with his life? Or does he want to try to stick it out for a long time? I think that remains to be seen. And would someone like Mélanie Joly, if the Liberal Party ends up back in opposition with a conservative government, would she want to kind of sit that out and kind of bide her time there? Again, I think it remains to be seen, but I think that she's certainly, it looks like she has those ambitions. Supriya, I think, would be more tuned in with that potentially.
We lost her, but I think definitely she's the industry minister these days, and is she's still like fairly. She's not as prominent publicly as she was when she was in her foreign affairs file, but she's definitely still there and still doing stuff. And
she's still at like a lot of these big industrial announcements and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like when they unveiled the auto policy yesterday, she was there.
Maybe I'm just not watching as many of the press conferences these days.
I watch a lot of the press conferences.
Yeah, I normally do too. I just this week I've been like, I don't know, all over the place. As somebody in the chat also says, Rachel, do you ever think you could get Naomi Klein on now that you have a connect with Avi? And I've been hunting for Naomi. I'm gonna try to get her one of these days. So Paris is also a connect to Naomi Klein in some ways, because you've done a ton of stuff with her as well. So but hopefully someday. I'm honestly just waiting for the right topic before I badger her with an ask, because I don't want to waste such a phenomenal guest, right? So we'll have to wait and see, but stay tuned, because I am really hoping I can get her at some point.
I'm sure.
Maybe the heated rivalry guys too, right? Through
there you go.
It's Avi's. I don't know if you guys
or
are
even just
aware.
the casting director, at least some connection.
The casting director is Avi Lewis's sister, for those of you who don't know.
Are you ordering the sweater from Province of Canada, or
honestly, okay, I'm gonna be real. I don't think it would suit me. I like a big white fluffy sweater on a 6 foot tall woman. I feel like I'm gonna feel like a Yeti a little bit. So I don't know if it's my speed. Maybe we'll see. Are you gonna get it?
No. I mean, it's white. Like, I don't really wear that color.
I know. And honestly, like, can any of us look as happy as Mark Carney looked in that
totally.
Fleece? Like he really showed the peak there. I can't get
Did
over
you
that.
see that the Montreal company that made the original fleece that they kind of embellished with the maple leaf and stuff like that, kind of like got mad because they were promoting this new fleece using their fleece, and like demanded credit. I read about it in CBC yesterday.
That's some hot Canadian fleece industry drama for you folks.
Totally.
So,
yeah.
Okay, guys, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. But thank you so much for tuning in. Paris, thank you for your time. As always, I love talking shit about politics with you. So I appreciate you making yourself available. And hopefully I will see Paris and all of you back here very soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, or wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and Blue Sky. I'd like to give a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for making the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's a lowercase h with an exclamation mark. Thank you again for spending this time with me. This is my dream job. I know I say that every week, but that's because it's true every week, and I couldn't do it for 1 second without your support. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.